I'm Sierra, and I guess I'll just say what I'm studying as well. So I'm a gender studies major and an ethnic studies major with a minor in political science.
Wonderful. And I'm Dr. Isabel Fukushima, and I'm an assistant professor in the Ethnic Studies Division in the School for Cultural and Social Transformation. So I'm here to ask you some questions. Tell me about what drew you to majoring in ethnic studies and gender studies. If you can think about a specific experience that you had that sort of drew you to this major.
Um, I don't know that I can think of like a specific experience. I can say that I changed my major 5 times before I landed on gender studies, and then I was like, well, might as well take on ethnic studies too, because it's all very interesting to me. And I think like for me, the thing that I felt really drawn to was that everything feels very purposeful. It's never like I'm just going through the motions. Everything feels like there is a reason for doing it, and it's for change, and it's for, the betterment of our world. And so that's why I think I've been really drawn to it, and I stuck with it ever since, and I didn't stick with my other five.
That's great. And I think that changing your major 5 times is actually pretty normal. Most undergrads change frequently. So, yeah. So, share a most memorable moment while being a major.
Um, I think my most memorable, I don't know that it's like necessarily a moment or a specific moment in time, but like the most memorable thing I've done is the communities. I started planning the communities with Jen, our advisor, and it was just a great way for like all of us to come together. And I loved seeing everyone, like it was once every month or 2 times every month, and being able to sit down and talk about what we're studying, but also talk about like the real world current issues and everything we were all experiencing, and be able to create some sort of like communal space where we could all lean on each other because we were all experiencing the same things in that moment.
That's great. That's so wonderful, and I think that's a very ethnic studies thing to create a sense of collectivity and solidarity. Yeah. So, tell me about a project you're able to work on, or your plans to work on for Transform.
Um, so I mean, that was one of my projects. And then I've done various other things. Like I was senator last year, so it was really cool to be able to, work on things there and get funding for different things in Transform. And of course, be able to plan the community because I was able to get that funding for Transform. So that was like one really cool project that I felt like I was able to be a part of because I could do something that was helpful and meaningful to the college. And then it was helpful and meaningful for me too because I could sit with all of my classmates once a month and just chat.
That's awesome. Let's see. So the last question is, what are the key words that define the School for Cultural and Social Transformation?
Um, I feel like when I think of our college, I think of progression. And I say progression very like purposefully because it's not just progress where it's like you can measure an amount of progress that has happened. It's a continuous movement forward. And so that's what I think of when I think of our college is, we're constantly changing, constantly moving, and we're always moving in a forward direction.
Awesome. Well, that's the questions that I have for you.
Okay, so I'll start with your questions. How did you end up teaching in ethnic studies? What path did you take that led you here?
So how did I end up teaching in ethnic studies? What is the path that led me here to University of Utah? Is that the
Um,
question, or in
just
general?
necessarily just as a professor, like what was your passions that led you there?
Yeah, so when I was applying for grad school, I think that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I think I'm like many young folks when you're open and you're casting the net wide, you're curious. And I remember when I was applying to grad schools, I applied to 11 schools. University of California, Berkeley's Ethnic Studies program was the last school I applied to. I did not think I would get in, and I almost didn't apply. And at the last hour, I submitted my application, and then by this spring, I believe it was, I found out that I was accepted into the program. And so in that sense, I started this journey towards being an ethnic studies scholar at UC Berkeley. And that path was because I was super interested in thinking through issues of violence, immigration, and how it impacts and how our communities are impacted by violence, and witnessing those communities. And so that's kind of the earlier part of my journey. What led me to University of Utah was that I was, applying widely for the market, trying to get closer to California and to Hawaii. My families are both in California and Hawaii. And I was at Rutgers in New Jersey for 2 years. And so my goal really was to get closer to family. And when I visited University of Utah, I just felt like there was a lot of welcome and a lot of interest in learning more about ethnic studies. And at the time, we were a program, and by the second year I was here, we became our own school. And so it actually was a very exciting time to be a professor in ethnic studies, is to be in this literally transformative period of growth, which is actually super rare for ethnic studies programs, is that, in our moment, we were growing with gender studies and disability studies, imagining kind of a future for social justice oriented programming.
I like that. And I feel like you kind of somewhat answered a little bit of what one of my other questions is, so I'll just move into that one. What is your research on?
Oh, yeah. So my research is looking at issues of gender-based violence and racial violence. In particular, I recently published a book called Migrant Crossings, Witnessing Human Trafficking in the United States, where I look at Asian and Latinx communities who have been trafficked through the US border or into the US and after their crossing. And it's a socio-legal analysis of their journey and experiences of being immigrant here in the US, and how they are bound to being seen as either victims or criminals, illegal or legal, or citizen or non-citizen, many non-citizens, and the sort of dualities that they're bound to. And so that's one book project that I worked on, but now I am a project lead for the University of Utah's Gender-Based Violence Consortium. And so we work collaboratively across different communities. And one of the projects that I'm leading up is visualizing gender-based violence. And so the goal is to create a time-spatial interactive platform where communities can learn more about the different ways that violence has occurred across time and space since the 1990s.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that about you, though, so that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah.
I did know about your book, but I didn't know about the consortium, so that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So next question is, was there ever a defining moment in your career that felt like the most impactful to you?
Was there ever a defining moment in my career that felt the most impactful to me? I think that, well, that's a big question. I feel like now I know how the questions felt towards when you were answering them, because there's so many. I would like to say that in the world of academia and academic institutions, we oftentimes don't see change happening very quickly. Change in institutions and in our society is very slow. But one of the places that I have seen radical transformation is in the classroom. And so I would say that anytime I teach, it is actually where I see the most change happening, which is inspiring and motivating for me. I don't do this work for myself. I do this work because of the communities I live in. And those communities include my students, colleagues, the university that I work in, and the larger community that a university sits in. And so for me, the most impactful has been seeing students change in their thinking or grow in their thinking, and actually discover more of themselves, their interest, and their passions to make our world more just. And so that for me has been the most inspiring. So every semester feels impactful, even in a semester that is COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you as well. I feel like this semester has maybe felt the most impactful because it's given me time to kind of like really sit and actually work through the things, you know, I mean, it's all currently happening in this current moment, and it always has been, but it's kind of right in
Mhm.
front of our face. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one thing that I've appreciated about this semester. And I mean,
Mhm.
on another hand, you're talking about, you know, your community being your students. I feel that is a common theme amongst most of the professors in our school. And so that's something I really appreciate as a student.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
And then my last question is, what is your best advice for students in Transform?
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if it's the best advice, but it's advice that I can offer now. The work of social change and justice-oriented, anti-racist, work and work that is addressing many of the oppressions in our society is slow, difficult, and long. But one of the things that I know about the work that we do is that we don't do it alone. And so for me, it is about coalition. And coalition is messy, it's difficult, and it's filled with tension, and it's also beautiful and radically life altering. And so for me, the advice would be is to work in coalition with each other, with your colleagues, your peers, with your professors. See us as also in coalition with you, as well as even those that make institutions run, like our staff, and so I think that for me, the work of coalition is difficult, and that I encourage folks that are entering into fields of transformative fields like gender studies, ethnic studies, and disability studies, is that you not see yourself alone, you see coalition as messy, and that you continue to persevere, because the work of, when I think about colonization and oppression, is that it's traumatic. And what trauma does is it breaks our connection to ourselves and to our communities. And so the important work of undoing that trauma and that oppression is to create connection.